A Healer's Gift. Adventures of Broad. Book 1. Adventures on Broad. Written by Tao Wong. Narrated by Eric Martin. Chapter 4. In the morning, a hurried breakfast is all that Daniel has time for before he rushes over to the training hall. Litzburn is already waiting and directs Daniel to join the other trainees in a slow warm-up jog around the hall. The remainder of the day falls into the pattern of the previous day, more calisthenics and weight training for a few hours before they dove into the meat of the program, focused on the use of his mace and shield. Outside of a short lunch break, Daniel is given very little time to rest, which makes him truly grateful for the packed lunch that was pressed on him by Elise as he left that morning. By the time late afternoon has come, Daniel is beaten and ragged. Numerous other trainees have come and gone throughout the day, most only spending a few hours in the hall before leaving to run other tasks. Only a few trainees stay throughout the day, each of those given extra special attention by Litzburn for their dedication. Daniel is focused on a paired movement and striking exercise, attempting to keep his feet, shield, and mace moving together, and so he never notices Mary's entrance and silent consideration. "Hold!" Caught in the middle of a swing, his opponent freezes and steps back, putting distance between himself and Daniel. Daniel freezes too, his shield half raised to block the blow, his mace swinging from below in return, and paused too. Daniel stands there, frozen for a moment, before he remembers to step away from his opponent as well, ensuring a safe distance is created. Only then does he look over to Litzburn, who is gesturing him over to himself and Mary. 10-minute break, then you'll be sparring with Mary," Litzburn calls out to Daniel as he nears before turning away from the tired young man to the rest of his students. Stifling a groan, Daniel flops down in the corner of the training floor before reminding himself to grab a drink of water. As he rests, he stares at his newly updated skill screen, the second one to appear after his rests. Skill increase, clubs, basic, 37 out of 100, plus 3. Skill increase, shields, basic, 11 out of 100, plus 5. "I'm learning very fast," muses Daniel as he dismisses the skill screen. "I guess that's what a real trainer and training ground will do." Even to his untrained senses, Daniel can sense the skill stones that dot the building, helping him to learn faster, even while Litzburn corrects his mistakes with a critical, experienced eye. Still, he can feel a wave of apprehension rising in him at the thought of actually sparring Mary. Even in his inexperience, he could tell that she was significantly more experienced. "Damn it, stop worrying. She isn't going to hurt you. Drink some more water and let's get going." Chiding himself, Daniel pushes himself up and walks over the water barrel again before approaching the waiting senior adventurer. Mary's dressed in a near replica of her clothing yesterday, a simple white blouse with a black lace vest and tight brown pants that show off her trim body. Her sword is strapped to her right side, still sheathed, and in her left hand she holds a training sword. She looks Daniel over critically, bright blue eyes clinical in their assessment, before she waves him onto the training floor, following along shortly behind. A brief salute is exchanged, and immediately Daniel hunkers down beneath his shield, mace at his side near his waist, as he circles her and probes for an opening. Mary just turns, only shifting her blade slightly to cover the exposed angles, until Daniel lunges forward, committing to an attack. With the barest of motions, the attack is deflected, and Mary returns a riposte aimed at Daniel's shoulder, which he barely dodges by jumping back. Regaining his footing, Daniel hunkers back down and works to calm his nerves, the barely moving form of Mary an intimidating presence. Again, he begins to move forward, this time attempting a blow from over his shield. Mary catches his mace in a casual block, and as he recovers, she casually strikes him in his upper arm. He growls, trying another attack, which is just as quickly and neatly defended before her words ring out, "Stop leaning in before each attack." The sparring continues for an hour, with short breaks as she corrects his form and attacks. Not once does he even come close to landing a blow on her, each attack casually deflected with a flick of a wrist or twist of the elbow. After each committed attack, Mary launches a single return blow of her own, forcing Daniel to scramble to block or dodge in turn. "Hold," she says. Daniel pauses and steps back, ensuring he is safe from a return attack before lowering his tired arms. "Good. We're done. Work on what we talked about tomorrow. I'll see you for dinner at the top." With that and a final salute, Mary turns and strides out of the training ground. Daniel sighs, watching her go, and feels somewhat inadequate at his failure to land a single blow. Before he can begin to get too morose, a hand lands on his shoulder. "Don't worry about it. Even experienced adventurers had a hard time landing a hit on her, and that's before she first entered the dungeon and leveled up. That girl, her ability, it isn't normal. You did well for your first time." Chuckling, Litzburn pushes Daniel towards the racks. "Best get dressed and moving. She hates to be kept waiting." Chapter 5. At the spinning top, Mary waves Daniel over to her table in the inn, where a meal is already set, awaiting him. Taking a seat gratefully, Daniel speaks. So, thank you for today." "It's fine. Now, eat. You need it." She waves him towards the food before she continues. "What do you know about the dungeon in Karlak?" Caught between two conflicting orders, Daniel chews quickly and swallows before answering. "It's a beginner dungeon, so it's suitable for those just starting out adventuring. There are 10 levels, with monsters growing stronger at each level. The dungeon is considered extremely suitable for melee fighters starting out, and, that's it." "So, nothing really. Do you know what kind of dungeon this is? What monsters spawn in the first sector? Do you even know about sectors? How about how many mobs you can expect to see per level? Who is the dungeon boss? What kind of weaponry is most suitable? Why are melee fighters most suited for this dungeon?" Mary lectures Daniel, waving her own fork as she speaks. Daniel stops chewing at her words, hunching a bit into his chair as he realizes exactly how unprepared he is. Seeing his reaction, Mary relents a little. "It's fine. It's a beginner mistake. Just do your research next time, all right?" Mary waits for Daniel's sheepish nod before leaning forwards and meeting his eyes. "Melee fighters have a bad enough reputation of never using our heads. There's no reason to foster that reputation. Prior research about a dungeon is what separates the professionals from the dead." Pausing to emphasize her point and making sure it sinks home, she continues to answer her own questions. "It's common knowledge that dungeons are a way for Erlist to cleanse herself of the corruption that Baal releases into the mana flows. The monsters created in a dungeon are patterned upon the various minions of Baal, though they do not truly live. It's why they do not often exit the dungeons, and when they do, most break down outside of the dungeon in short order. Of course, a dungeon that isn't regularly cleared of monsters will have no choice but to strengthen those monsters, eventually giving them sufficient strength to leave the dungeon itself. In time, an unchecked dungeon can become the source of Baal's infestation, leading to tragedies like the Abandoned Lands. Of course, as adventurers, we're mostly concerned about the mana crystals, the seeds that Erlist uses to create the monsters, and our main source of income. There are 2 kinds of dungeons: the permanent dungeons like the ones in Karlak and the capital Warbiz, and the temporary dungeons which appear randomly. Permanent dungeons rarely change their overall structure, often fixing their floors and the monsters for years at a time. While minor changes in designs and traps do occur, the overall structure of a permanent dungeon stays the same, and as such are often considered safer than temporary dungeons. Temporary dungeons, or instances, are rarer. They appear in places where mana and Baal's corruption have built up, and by their very nature are extremely chaotic. Monsters and layouts may change significantly from one trip to the next, which make them extremely dangerous to clear. However, because they are built from corrupt mana sources that have temporarily congregated, these dungeons often do not last longer than a few completions. Having finished his meal, Daniel places his utensils down and stays silent, listening to the lecture. It is pleasant to not move, and the information she provides is important, even if some of it is well known. Seated, Daniel can feel his body recovering already, regaining the strength it used through the day. Now, for ease of understanding, the Adventurers Guild has split each dungeon into sectors, a sector ranging from a single floor to 10. Sectors are grouped due to the nature of the monsters, the traps, and the layouts of the floors. At the end of each sector, it's possible that there are sector bosses, monsters whose strength is significantly greater than the average mob already encountered. They aren't even necessarily a monster that you meet on that floor, though most dungeons keep to a theme of some form. This isn't always true, though, but it is in the case of Karlach. In Karlach, there are 3 sectors which consist of 3 floors. The 10th floor isn't a true floor, but a single room with the final boss monster of the dungeon. The first sector in the Karlach dungeon is inhabited by kobolds. They move in groups of a maximum of 3 kobolds at the 3rd level, but for the 1st level, you'll at most run into 2 of them, and even then that's highly unlikely. She pauses for a moment, taking a drink from her tankard, and Daniel takes the moment to ask a question. "What are they like?" "Kobolds?" For a moment, Mary racks her brains, trying to recall the looks of the creature. It has been many years since she has fought one of those herself. "Small, about 3 to 4 feet tall at most, extremely thin, very fast with elongated ears and pale gray skin from living underground for so long. They rarely wear much in terms of armor, and in the 1st level wield a dagger-like item, though some carry slings for ranged attacks. Overall, they are the perfect mob for beginner melee fighters." Daniel nods in thanks, and seeing he has no further questions, Mary continues, "Due to the prevalence of the kobolds in the first few levels, corridors are small and cramped in many areas. There are numerous side tunnels in the first few levels with no safe zones for healing. Large weapons like a spear or hammer," she flashes him a quick smile at that one before continuing, "are not advisable due to the lack of room. All adventurers should carry a backup dagger for close combat fighting due to the layout and expect potential sneak attacks." Opening her mouth to continue her lecture, she is interrupted by her sister Elise, who is accompanied by a young boy clad in a ragged tunic who could at best be 8 years old. "Sorry about this, Mary, but young Pearson needs to speak with Daniel." The young boy impatiently pushes forward, placing a hand on Daniel's arm. "Sir, Charles mentioned you healed him good when he was hurt." At Daniel's nod, he rushes on, "Please, will you come and heal my mum?" Chapter 6. Following Pearson through the lightly illuminated streets of Karlach, Daniel is struck by the thought that this is his first foray into the town at night. Old tales about the dangers of the city makes Daniel's hand open and close in want of his hammer. Unknown to him, Karlach was actually a very safe town, as guards routinely patrolled the streets looking for trouble. Regular troublemakers were sentenced to work in the dungeon, collecting a set number of mana stones before they were released. Troublemakers and thieves would either die in the dungeon or just become adventurers after their term was done, since the work was easier and more regular. Unfortunately, Daniel knows none of this, and he continually twists his head around, peering into the shadows of alleyways and doorways as they pass, expecting to be robbed. It is only Pearson's words that distract him from his obsession. "You can heal my mum, right, sir? Please?" "I'll do my best," Daniel hesitantly promises, knowing that his gift has limits. Not many, for sure, but the cost does increase. Still, the conversation does take his mind away from the supposed dangers of the night as they leave the center of town. Charles said you brought him back alive. My mom's not dead, so you can heal her, the child continues, pulling on Daniel's hand to hurry him along. He wasn't dead. Realizing he forgot the child's name, Daniel trails off. Instead, he changes the subject before Pearson can continue. Are we headed to your home? No, we're going to the clinic. Even Daniel can hear the capitalization in the child's voice, forcing him to inquire, the clinic? Yeah, that's where we all go, the poor. Kira treats us all. Pearson happily imparts his knowledge to the adult. She's real pretty, but she never lets me eat any sweets, and she said she couldn't help my mom. But you can, so you're better. Kid, Daniel trails off, shaking his head. No use trying to dissuade him of destroying the child's hope just yet. Instead, he asks another question. Who's Kira? Is she a healer? Yeah, the best. Well, other than you. Mom says she opened a clinic years ago, and since then she treats everyone, even if you're poor. She never says no, but it's boring going because there's always people there, Pearson explains. Much of the information imparted by Pearson isn't particularly surprising to Daniel. Healing potions and healing spells were expensive as materials, and experienced users were rare. Healers rarely ventured into dungeons to gain experience faster, which meant they could only increase levels by practicing their craft. Unfortunately, most skills had diminishing returns in their experience gain if the same action was taken over and over again, which of course was what healers mostly did. There really wasn't anything new to be learned, dealing with the common cold for the 100th time. Powerful healing spells drained mana at a significant rate, and with individual mana pools taking up to 8 hours to refill, common folk rarely had access to powerful healing magics. The rarity of healers is one reason Miles, the mine overseer, and many of his miner colleagues had tried to convince him to stay at the mining camp, or, at the very least, to not waste his gift and train to become a healer. Daniel's healing gift was rare and powerful, especially since it drew upon his experience and energy, and thus were a source of energy separate from his mana. Daniel could have become a truly miraculous healer, able to heal using 2 forms of energy along with more mundane skills. Even the royal healer was known to do very little actual magic-assisted healing, since he would need to husband his mana in case of a sudden need for his abilities. Still, the fact that there was a location in Karlak where the poor could find some form of healing, overworked and crowded as it might be, was a surprise. Daniel can't help but wonder what kind of person this Kira was. All idle thoughts come to an end as they finally arrive at the clinic. A weather-worn sign hangs outside with the universal symbol of healing, a crossed pair of hands with jagged lines coming from the hands to indicate an aura. The 2-story building itself sprawls across 2 lots and is by far the best-kept building in the neighborhood, with fully working windows and doorways, even if obvious signs of wear and patching are visible. Pearson doesn't even stop before pushing open the door, closely followed by Daniel. Inside, what looks to be a waiting room is filled with the poorer denizens of Karlak awaiting treatment. Few even bother looking up from their seats at the child and Daniel's entrance, lost in their thoughts as they are. Ailments range from the simple open wounds that need stitching to broken bones and the disease-ridden. Pearson doesn't spare a glance to those inside, instead rushing to the corridor behind and leading Daniel up the stairs to a second-floor room. In the room, a surprisingly young woman lies, wasting away. Pearson's mother's face is drawn, excess fat removed, and what would have been once a beautiful face drawn in pain. Through the room, an obnoxious stench of pus and other unmentionables permeate, making Daniel gag at the stench. "Mom, I brought him. You'll be fine. He'll heal you." Pearson's voice comes to Daniel as he walks over, a hand landing on the young woman's shoulder so that he may activate his gift. Oh, so that's what it looks like when it's advanced. None of the men I treated at camp ever let it get that far before they saw me. His eyes locked on her groin area. He follows the lines of infection spreading outwards and invading her body. He senses the raised temperature, body struggling to fight off the infection and failing. She will be dead in a few days if I do nothing. "Why are you waiting? Come on! Heal her!" Almost stamping his feet in impatience, Pearson pushes at Daniel's leg. Then a trace of fear crosses his voice as he realizes where the young adventurer is looking, the young child's voice beginning to tremble. "You're not going to heal her, are you? Because she's a whore?" Shaken by the child's voice, Daniel pulls himself away from the mother to look at Pearson. "It's not that, kid. I just needed to know what I was healing first. My magic isn't like the others. I need to understand what I'm going to fix before I can do it. She's too weak to use her own energy. We have to drop her temperature first, then we can cleanse the infection from her body. After that, we'll have to seal the wounds so she's not reinfected." Exhaling forcefully, Daniel reaches out to place his hand on the delirious woman's head as he kneels down. "Pearson, this is going to take a while, so don't worry if nothing seems to be happening. I'm going to have to go slow with your mum." As he finishes, Daniel calls forth his gift and sends it into her, pouring his energy just a little bit into her body at a time. He pushes it slowly, letting it fill her body without attempting to guide it at all at first, the energy lighting up along the meridian pathways of her body, starting from her head downwards. As his energy fills her, her breathing eases, her heartbeat steadying under the passive influence of his gift. When he is ready, finally, he begins to actively manipulate the energy, working to lower her overheated body before beginning the long, slow process of flushing her body of the toxins that permeate her blood and the infection that causes it. The healing isn't easy, each moment a sacrifice. He doesn't speak of the cost to others, though his grandfather and a few others have guessed long ago. In Broad, the gifted were believed to be blessed by Erlist herself. In others, they were considered curses laid by Baal for the toll each gift took upon their users. In truth, none knew where the gift came from. Like all gifts, Daniel's had a cost, and his tore away knowledge and experience with each moment of use. Knowledge of past actions, past conversation, training and experience drawn from his body. Hours later, Daniel opens his eyes and tries to stand, pushing against the bed frame. Legs locked in a single position for hours are unable to hold the weight placed on them, and Daniel stumbles forward, caught from crashing into his patient by a steadying hand. "Thank you," Daniel croaks out as he sways slightly. He is quickly guided to a seat by his unexpected helper, a matronly older lady. "No, thank you. Peony would be dead without you." The old lady guides him to a waiting seat before turning back to her task of wiping down the patient. It's only then that he realizes how much worse the room smells now. All the toxins and infection from Peony's body have leaked into the room, creating a truly horrendous stench that not even an open window could aid. "I do hope all your work isn't as smelly as this," the old lady continues as she bathes the newly healed young woman. Daniel grins weakly before quenching his thirst with a glass of water. It's been ages since he used so much power on a single individual. Even Charles's healing was simpler than eradicating the disease that had ravaged Peony's body. Still, he cannot help but smile as he watches the young woman rest easier, Pearson curled up at the base of her bed asleep. As he contemplates his work, another figure strides in, one that causes his jaw to drop. An elf. Never having seen an elf before in real life, Daniel stares at the elf with undisguised awe. The elf is tall, clad in a simple green frock that hugs her slim upper body on top of a buxom chest, waist-length blonde hair spilling out behind long pointed ears. The elf moves with a lithe grace to Pearson's mum, a delicate hand moving in arcane gestures as she checks on the condition of the patient. Satisfied, the blonde elf turns to Daniel, who has managed to close his mouth at last and stand up. "I'm Daniel. Would you be Kira?" He offers his hand to shake, which is promptly taken. Her skin is surprisingly soft and smooth, a sharp contrast to his own rough and calloused hands. "Kyra." She corrects his pronunciation offhandedly, not expecting him to get it right as she turns to point at Pearson's mum. "Your gift, it's incredible. It's at least the equivalent of a Tier 4 healing spell, maybe 5. Are you able to use it again today?" "Kind of. That took a lot out of me." As he speaks, he meets the enthusiastically nodding Kyra's gaze. Sparkling green eyes meet his own, and Daniel's excuses catch in his suddenly dry mouth. "Maybe a bit." "Good. I'm not much of a healer. I only know a single Tier 3 spell, so there's much I can't do for these people. There are a few others I'd love you to see if you are willing." She casts an entreating look at Daniel, who sighs, consoling himself that he will get to spend more time with the beautiful creature before him. "I'll do what I can." "Excellent." Gripping his arm to her full chest, Kyra drags Daniel out of the room to visit her patients, already beginning to list the many issues that they face. Behind them, the matronly old woman is left alone, smiling slightly at the departing, smitten young man.